So, um, one place to begin is just to sort of start at what might be the beginning if I'm talking about something called mental health. But the first thing to note about the phrase mental health is hardly anybody says, I want to be mentally healthy. You know, the more quaint phrase in the first half of the 20th century was mental hygiene. I want to have mental health. Nobody says that. It's not poetic and it's not. So it would only be a professional who had something to market that nobody really wanted, who'd say, I'm a mental health professional. Okay? So having said that, when I think of mental health issues and what I've heard over the years that I've worked at Southwestern um, from instructors especially, has been, so what kind of health issues kind of impact classes? Um, Dramatically, I would tend to think we have people who fell into categories like real clinical levels of anxiety, clinical levels of depression, uh, and um, and certainly things that would combine them, like post-traumatic stress disorder. So that should a person have some kind of episode, um, depressive episode, um, or a panic attack, or just their PTSD is getting the better of them in such a way that they really can't concentrate in the class, can minimally interact, and indeed their intellect's kind of hijacked in terms of being able to perform for X period of time, whether it's a few days or a week or more. Um, those things clearly can impact classes. To a lesser degree, we'll also have students who might be high functioning, but something like perfectionism may really cripple them in terms of their ability to go with what's actually happening. So those are a few things to name right off the bat. Okay, in general. And you get other things too. We'll get the kind of the weird behaviors, the weird emails, where somebody says, something like, I was locked out of your class and I'm a whatever, Could be, I already have a degree from Western. I'm a vet. I'm a whatever. And you're doing this to a certain class of people, And it's like, okay, and I'm not, going to take anybody down, but I'm going to appeal to the president, I'm going to, it's like these kind of messages that cross themselves, and like, what's this person talking about? There's a level of drama and a level of them being an aggrieved victim who's actually going to save the day. That we've had some of you run across some of that kind of weird stuff. Just saying, people have weird stuff too. Make sense? If you haven't been treated to it, just know that it happens occasionally. So I'm just saying, we deal with a multitude of things, and just wondering if it doesn't seem kind of sort of right to say that if we could help reduce the level of anxiety that any troubled student was functioning with, if we could knock that down a couple of notches so that they might have somewhat calmer feelings, somewhat clearer thinking about what they needed to do, that would be helpful. And if we could knock that down for all of our students, it would be helpful. Does that make sense? So I tend to say, whatever the diagnosis, if we could lower the level of anxiety, we would just have better functioning. Does it make some sense to say that? So, just does anybody have any other kind of mental health thought? Like, yes, this is what happens in my classroom. Anything that you want to bring forth?
Yeah, I guess I thought it's kind of, it'll be short.
Sure.
As most of my thoughts are. But like just kind of going back to the panel that I did with Tanya and the gang, and something that I've noticed over the years with my students is that kind of with two categories of students that I have that tend to struggle. When it comes to students with physical
good.
Anecdotally, they're usually successful. Like most of the time, the students that I have that have some type of education plan, some type of plan to deal with some type of disability, could be mobility or visual impairment, they're usually successful for the most part. But it's the students that I've had over the years that have some type of mental health condition, either diagnosed or not, yet to be diagnosed.
Right.
Numbers-wise, I mean, it's probably like 75 or 80% of them typically fail or withdraw the first semester. And I've had them, so many of them, this is even with, like, trying to help them out, provide extra support, referring them to you or the Wesley before you, or
Sure.
now to Tanya. And I just, as someone who tries to be an advocate of, mental wellness and everything, I just want to kind of point that out. Just because I think we do a good job of helping our students with, physical impairments of some sort or another. But I think where we could, use some improvement, and why I appreciate you're doing this workshop, is with the mental health issues. Because those are the students that I have that typically struggle the most.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Okay, thank you for that observation. Yeah. By the way, I've hideously over-designed this in the last month. I have like 35 pages of notes, and it's not going to work out. It's just an hour. Let me conflate everything under the heading of anxiety, and then we're going to see where that gets us. And that's to say, what do we already know about anxiety and stress? What causes stress, class? So, what causes stress?
Not anything. Very unusual. Individuals can cause stress. I think if we're talking about our students, it's probably all the responsibilities they have to juggle. While they're in school.
Okay. Okay. Stress is caused by circumstances. Plainly, our feelings come from whatever we're dealing with. If we're dealing with something pleasant, we have good feelings. If we're dealing with something challenging and unpleasant and that's out of our comfort zone, we will not feel so well. We get enough of that, it will bring us down. Does that make sense? That is what we all know about stress. Yeah. So plainly, a lot of Floridians, and especially almost everybody in Puerto Rico is experiencing stress. And other places where there are not Americans involved can experience stress as well. Not to be too cute there. I want to start putting a few things over here. That's going to be the stress side. But human beings, when they experience something that's a real shift, I'm going to try to specify this a little bit, but they may feel like they're in the middle of something that's really overwhelming, very hard to deal with. But when they experience just a shift, it's like, oh, if I approached it this way, that would be so helpful. Another name for that is human beings when they are really experiencing resiliency. What kinds of things might we say about that? What kinds of things might people be sort of doing where that might tend to support that kind of experience? In other words, humans at their very healthiest You're not just being healthy in the middle of a nice situation, but something is coming through in the middle of a difficult situation. What tends to help with that? What might human beings be doing? I talk about opening or something. Sure.
Well, on a larger scale, if you could frame your stressful situation in light of a larger purpose, that can help you realize that the stressful situation is situational versus forever. It's just basic self-care that gets you through the situation. Perspective, yeah. And sometimes that comes, well, I just met with a student yesterday who's dealing with these issues, and sometimes that comes just by talking, touching base or expressing that narrowing of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes just putting down script rather than letting them work.
It is working. It is working.
Not just talking to anybody, talking with somebody who knows a little bit about listening. Okay? Because you could tell me what was going on with you and I could try to fix it real fast. It makes sense. Trying to fix things real fast isn't necessarily the same thing as listening. Yeah, that's all. Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, those kind of things. There are probably other things we could add over here, but I just wanted to start the list over here. So, that may be too much of one. So I just want to keep this space open for what does resiliency, what does healing, what does something that we might experience as a breakthrough, what does it feel like? Just wanted to just open that territory up a little bit. Over, especially since 2004, so the last 13 years, I have had cause to question what we know, or what we assume about what causes stress, and what keeps people locked into patterns that are really dysfunctional for them. So that's all sorts of patterns, but especially patterns of thinking. Yeah, here we go. We can ask the question, and it's like a bizarre question to ask until you start asking it, start generating information from it, but where does human experience come from? Well, it's the same place stress comes from. It comes from circumstances. My feelings come from the circumstances that I'm experiencing. They come from what that person just said to me and the tone of voice they delivered it in. That's where my feelings come from. Make sense? Of course, we know that. And people shouldn't say that kind of thing. Yeah, I've been there a lot. I mean, really, don't want to say that, but I have been there a lot. So, it is pretty much the same. It's like kind of a worst case scenario. Very little can get done with any kind of ease. Any questions about that? I'm just kind of labeling down here. And this is especially the place where there's so much pain, where people are saying of other people and other groups, how can they possibly think that, whatever they're thinking? It's a plane of real suffering. It's a place of real suffering, and it's a place where, you know, at its worst, there's a willingness to visit suffering on other people. Okay? Just want to suggest, that's kind of the very bottom. We could put in several layers here, but basically, there's a feeling of stress. There is, like, life's an effort and going on. And you know, I'm still willing to work and to study, but when I'm in this state, I would just say something like, well, you know, our teacher gave us a 5-page paper. We had to have 3 citations, and it's due in the next couple of days. And with the people that they're talking to, almost everybody's going to agree, oh, that's stressful. So we just name the stress as coming directly from school assignments and from things that we've got to do. So I'm going to hunker down. I'm going to try to do it. But it's stressful. It is just stressful being in the middle of that. Okay. There's probably more I want to say here, but let's step up and actually just make it feel like a leap. But by the way, we all know how to dip into a place of being stressed. We all know how to do that. We will dip in. If I just want to say, one way to think about this is our thinking is like the weather. Sometimes we have really good quality thinking that's pretty open, and sometimes we have really caught, pressured thinking, and we go, it's not necessarily a beautiful sine wave, but we go up and down, okay? And that's kind of, if we, somehow, I do not know why you guys signed up for the human experience. I don't recommend it, but you did. So if you're going to have the human experience, we're going to dip into, we take our thoughts so frickin' seriously, and into places where I have some space. So I just wanted to name a sense of maybe a neutral openness. I like to reify things. It's just space, but basically, I have room to take in new information. I have room for new solutions to arise. Right. By the way, you know, where do you think it's best? You know, it's easiest for learning, real learning, to show up. Above the red line or below it? Yeah. Just thought I'd throw that one in there. And then it's possible for there to be even more, I'm going to use the word grace, graced states. I do not use the L word very easily, but one of my dearest friends works with Rwandan orphans, and I'm just going to put it in her own idiom, but when she was a child, even though there were some pretty hard things going on in her family, I don't know when she started to experience it. It may have always been there, but she definitely remembers being out in a field behind her house when she was maybe 4 years old. And it happened to be, there was a fence there, and there were horses on the other side of the fence. And horses would come up when she was sitting there, and her experience was, I'm loved. And she put this in Christian terms, the love of Jesus is flowing through me. So that's just to say, I know someone who has put herself out in service, and where that takes her in particular is a capacity to listen. So she has actually been in Rwanda dealing with some of the young folks she's been working with who were jailed because some of them were living on the street, and several things happened, but basically in order to clean up the street, the kids were thrown in jail, and in order to convince these kids that they shouldn't be in the capital, they should be someplace else, they were beaten. And my friend went to visit. And she listened to the person who was directly responsible for keeping her kids in jail. And whatever this grace is, whatever this openness is, what it does for my friend is it allows her to listen. So she's not already at war with reality. She's not already at war with even the person who's jailing and sometimes beating her kids. She's there. Making sense? It's a possibility for human beings. And she had the space, and she said, I'm really concerned for my kids, and how can you help? And this guy just started to say, well, I have to do what I'm doing because the people who are over me think it needs to be this way. I have to do what they say because I'm the only person in my extended family right now who has a job. This is paying for 12 of us to live. And Sarah just said, I let her name go. Sarah said, yeah, I get that. And in no time, he was sobbing on her shoulder. Could he totally change the situation? No, he couldn't. He couldn't totally change it. But he now had a direct connection with those kids. I mean, he wasn't going to disappoint somebody that he had experienced this kind of openness with. Makes sense to say that? Just saying. If I were going to put something at the top, I'd put that kind of thing at the top. I want to say that we got a sense of the power of analytical thinking to create our sense of reality. Its role is to do that. And its limitations is that it can get stuck by itself. And there's something else. The identities we try to form here, because we've all seen it, we've seen the people who got PhDs. I want tar and feather, educational doctorates. No, just PhDs. But we know the people who have advanced degrees who think that their advanced degree means that they actually know something and that you need to respect them and that they have value because they have this degree. And we know it doesn't work that way. Right? I'm looking at the people with advanced degrees. Yeah. We know it doesn't work that way. We know people who would take any role that they have in their life and say, well, this is who I am. And it's like, it's a great role. There's a lot that gets done in that role. But there's no respect that is due you. There's no value that I can affirm that you have that's deep enough to satisfy what the connection that's not being made on the analytical side of things. So this is where we have the roles, where we form the roles, and they're not it. They have great value, but they're not it. I want to say what's it is something that, if I'm leery about using the L word, this word is a little iffy too, but being, not separating, but being. So it's going to be different from what analytical thinking is already doing. So other things that are happening when I'm talking about whatever being might be, there's going to be a sense of, I get to be present. I'm going to appeal to my lists here right now. I have a sense of kind of being with the source of things. One of the things that kind of shows up when there's kind of that freedom and openness, some creativity, some deeper insights into what's going on. A sense of odd clarity. A sense of being already connected to life. You could use the word flow. That's another angle on this. Clarity, just to say it, that word kind of hints at some of the stuff that we hear about occasionally. Every now and then we might get a personal sense of it, but it's what businesses, what really high-performing and creative businesses are looking for. They're looking for, what is our mission? What is the way of putting our mission and understanding our mission that is really on fire for us? That's really it. Like that kind of clarity. What is my mission? What is it? That's just it. That I'm already connected with life when I go that direction. It's not I have to weigh up all the pros and cons, because analytical thinking, weighing all the pros and cons, is still on the outside, but something that's already on the inside when it comes up with something. I want to point that direction. And that this is available to humans. So I'm trying to put some things over here. Has anybody here, raise your hand if you've had even a taste of anything like this, anything that has this kind of feeling. I got one nod, I got one finger. Okay, a little bit. Okay, my point here is it is very important for us to have this category, because there's a set of feelings that comes through here that point to kind of an that's happening. With our analytical thinking, the feelings when we're in the middle of analytical processes and performances and what have you, we know about them. Some of them are pleasant, some of them are not pleasant. We can kind of point to the things that are kind of involved with them. This is not separated. Because it's not separated, it is not a bright, shiny object that we can point to. It's not a bright, shiny concept we can point to. It is kind of like something's already there. Now, I don't want to limit it to this, but Jill Bolte Taylor, in her stroke of insight, basically had an experience where, her left hemisphere was largely shut off, which was the one that knew how to organize things and knew how to dial her phone, knew how to recognize the on the phone as actually being numbers and actually being able to coordinate and move a finger over and dial. The left brain was all in charge of that kind of organization. And the right brain was giving her this sense of, it's all energy. It's all moving together. And it's good. It's like, it's alive. There's not room for me to be separate from it. Aliveness is happening. So, a kind of a dramatic example, and I don't wish, left hemisphere strokes on all of us, but it's interesting that that kind of experience has shown up again and again and again for people who've had real spiritual breakthroughs. It's like it gets really clear. There's something underwriting our human experience that really makes it worthwhile to the degree we touch into it, the degree we even know it's there to be touched into. I stop questioning what the meaning of life is when I experience a moment of just being alive. And personally, when I meet with students, I need to say everything so quickly here. Even when they're cranking away down here, having zero new thoughts, and they're totally locked in, and they're trying to solve things. By the way, most of my psychotherapeutic training said, take the worst feelings humans have very seriously, because that's real. Because we want to avoid that stuff. We want to medicate it. So we want to take it real, because that's where the juice is. You got to work on that. And like, I have now come to see that, no, you don't get new insights there. We're not in touch with life there. Actually, what our feelings are telling us when we're experiencing all that thinking is, their feelings are telling us the quality of our thinking. And it's really poor quality down here. So, I'm not perfect. No. But I have a sense that if I can even be up here while listening to somebody talking here, I don't have to be in a fight with their experience. I don't have to be in a fight with their thinking. I don't have to have an agenda around it. Now, I get to place that side by side with one of the terms I like to use is I like to use a playing field. It's as if there are different playing fields in life, and any given class has its playing field, has the rules, the guidelines, the syllabus, all the things that we need to be doing in order to move forward in that class. Yeah, that's there, but I don't have to fight this person's experience. Whereas I used to have to, when I wasn't aware of this space, I was busy trying to very sweetly manipulate them so that they would want to grow out of it and do the hard work of growth to get out of it. And nowadays, I want to do something like what Sarah does. I get to listen. Also, my sense is, all humans participate in whatever this stuff is. And just listening with that kind of openness tends to allow some of this to come through. We already kind of named that. Any kind of good listening will tend to open up that space. I'm not saying this is all super easy, but I am saying where the base of the best stuff is going to happen with some sense of openness around it. All right. By the way, to the degree of we're on this side of the line and we look at the stuff up here, that neutral openness, I need to really practice neutral openness. I need to work on my thinking so that I only produce neutral open thoughts, And this grace thing, I have to really do something, at this point you have to, do weird theology. I need to do something to become worthy of this kind of grace, all right? Thinking from down here will turn this into a project. Whereas experience from up here will get to feel that there's life going on, and some things we want to change, but we get to change them from a place of being alive. Making some sense? A little bit of sense? Yeah.
What I was writing down is, this is what I've heard from instructors and advisors, is that they feel bad when they can't help a student. And so, if a student is coming in to sit down and talk to you with all of their
Mhm.
story,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
perspective and thinking on how things should be, and you meet them with wishes, well, I should be able to help them. I should be able to make this good for a better college or whatever. Then you're just meeting, you're all shitting on yourself, right? And so someone has to take, if you will, the high ground and not should themselves either into neutral openness, but with self-compassion lead themselves into neutral openness, where you can just sit with a student's story and realize that they probably have the capacity within them to do whatever it is they need to change. They just need to get this story out.
Question is, where does the experience come from? And I really have to start talking about, like the grand announcement is, okay, I'm now going to explore with you, or maybe just in front of you, with what is the power and capacity and the role and the limitations of human thinking. And for most of us, with what we know about stress and what we know about where human experience comes from, this becomes a very limited thing. It's like, well, I only think when I have to write certain kinds of papers. I don't think otherwise, you know. I only think when I'm really up the creek and I have to figure a way out, you know. I only think when I'm stuck, even though I'm probably not thinking, I might just be reacting. So we think thinking is only something that's happening when we would choose to call it thinking. And I just have to raise, with regard to any thing that we might experience, I mean, so just to experience a thing, it is interesting to note that what we call thinking is almost always what's called analytical thinking, which is to say the kind of thinking which knows how to separate things. So to the very notion of sensing that I'm dealing with a thing here is already to be in the realm of analytical thinking. Like, but what else do we have? Well, it turns out if you don't have that, you will have a different relationship with what those who are habituated to analytical thinking will have. Just saying. It's a little strange thing to say, but just the very sense of separation is built into that, built into our thinking. All right, let's just keep going with any time a situation has meaning for me, anytime I like it or I dislike it, anytime I have a preference, just put that in there. Am I dealing straight up with reality? It's already entered into categories and previous patterns that I've got going. So thinking is implicated. Does that make sense? My way of reflecting on the world and what I think it means is already implicated. I start getting brilliant here. I wrote this down a few hours ago, and it was just really brilliant. Where was it? But Yeah. So built in also pretty automatically with that sense of separation is, okay, what I'm looking at is important or not important. It's worthy of my attention. It's not worthy of my attention. In other words, we don't just take in the world around us. We're already interpreting it. And furthermore, when we deal with stuff that somehow has meaning for us, is somehow important to us, we have an identity, in the face of the given circumstance. This will be utterly illegible to the camera. That's great. So, does it make sense? We form identities super quickly with regard to what's going on. How's this going to affect me? Indeed, the only unifying aspect of analytical thinking is me. And furthermore, me is actually is a number of things. So I will have a part that might be, so we do this within as well as without. But I'll have a part that judges me for, playing video games all night and not getting my homework done. How could I be that stupid? And I'll have the video gaming part that just says, I'm so stressed, I don't know what else to do, I don't know how to feel good, I don't know how to get out from underneath the amount of anxiety I have. And then, I will have multiple parts and they're busy bumping off of each other. That is the human self, and there's some kind of weird rubber band that holds all that together. We are not a unity, and yet we will refer everything to some part of ourselves. I'm just saying, it gets pretty weird, and it's not anything out there, whether it's the color of paint on the wall or a horse I see in a pasture, is not anything that is causing me to have all of that internal stuff taking place. Does that make sense? Like, thinking is actually huge. I would go on to saying, actually, in terms of my experience, in terms of a human experience, my human experience is different from what I might possibly be taking in if I were simply someplace trying to be open to it all. Hardly any of us does that. We might do it a little bit, but that's not the human endeavor. It's, I have a purpose, I have things I need to do, I have things I feel I ought to do. Making sense? We cruise through our lives and we've got agendas going through. So we totally color things with our thinking. And furthermore, to the degree this is true, this is about separation, the identity that I'm going to form is an identity that feels like, I got to get these circumstances in order. I have to make my mother take back what she said to me. I have to get a pile of more money so I can have the things that I really want to have. I have to marry the right person. I have to have the right children. Make sense? That I have a huge amount of stuff that I have to do to be happy. And it's apart from me. And since it's apart from me, either it's going to come in some sort of already well-established, well-oiled way, some kind of negotiation, some kind of payment of money, and often it doesn't come very easily, and there can be a sense of desperation, and if what we wanted actually doesn't bring us happiness, like we feel separate. I'm separate. Where is the happiness? Making sense? This can be a pretty desperate identity or set of identities we set up for ourselves. Indeed, for me, this is a way to talk about what some psychologists talk about as the existential dilemma. Existential being, we're not in touch with life. It's out there, and we're not in touch with it. What do we do? Make sense? That's the existential dilemma. And death is like, what are you going to do about death? Because plainly that's the end of the happiness project. you know, it's probably oblivion into the bargain. Is it making sense? This is a pretty fraught kind of identity to be playing around with. And we ought to, that's, in our culture especially, we're on autopilot with regard to this stuff. I just want to suggest that. Anything anybody want to object to right this minute so far? I'm taking us down a path, and it will get more relevant to actually helping students soon. But I'm just trying to implicate our thinking. So obviously, if there's anything that we're doing where we feel like in order to get the circumstances we want, we have to go into some sort of performance mode. And I was just thinking earlier today, that's usually at one of three places. It's either kind of personally, you know, I find, you know, that person to be attractive, so I'm going to show my best face. Secondarily would be, we don't think about this a whole lot, but I think we still do some of this. So like, there's some group that if I join them, they are special people in the positive sense of the word. And they, you know, anyway, there's some kind of power that's going to come to me because I'm associated with them. Ivy League schools are the most socially acceptable place for this these days. So classically, it was the men's clubs that women weren't allowed into. But also, obviously, for almost all of us, there's some kind of company or organization that's, you know, a possible employer, and I'm going to give put on my best face. I'm going to do something that makes me look good. Just saying, if we're involved in that, we're smack in the middle of thinking on top of thinking on top of thinking. Make sense? We're not actually wide open in front of a circumstance, ready to dance with it. We could be, but that's not typically what we're doing when we're thinking about this stuff. All right. All right. Just, if we've got any shoulds, any should nots, like that should not have happened. This cannot be. That should not have happened. Just to say, it's a cute thing to say it this way, and I like how some people say it, which is, so far are we from just experiencing reality directly. If we'd say this, you know, I'll say we. We're in a fight with what is. We're in a fight with reality. We are so far from directly having an experience of reality that we're actually fighting it. And as Byron Katie has so wonderfully said, anytime you're fighting reality, the only thing about that is we lose only 100% of the time. That's brilliant thinking, and we all do it. I'm not saying there aren't some things to change. But if we do them with that kind of energy, that is a really freaking closed system. It is not taking in really good information. Making sense to suggest that? That's how powerful our thinking can be. Has any of this shown up recently in any of our political processes? Just making an illusion. And you could say that from any side. You could truly say it from any side. All right. Just to add this in there. Idealism is literally to put a should in there. Just to put an idea out someplace and say this is the way things should be. Idealism, when it is disappointed, I would suggest, I can get all the letters in there. That produces cynicism. Cynics are really disappointed idealists. All of that. It is so entrenched in thinking. Okay? And so stuck on, some kind of ideal, some kind of thing that should be, something that I need to happen, something that without which I will not feel like I can live my life. I'm just saying, I'm going into all this, and I'm going to let up right now, but just to say, that's human thinking. So, by the way, as long as it's on the movie screen or in a novel, a lot of us, at least at various points in our life, don't mind reading about this stuff. We don't mind being in a world where characters are experiencing being caught up in this stuff. And as a wonderful friend of mine said, years and years ago, if only the people on General Hospital would learn to communicate, they wouldn't have all these issues, So that's just to say part of what's not happening when we're caught in this stuff. So part of what's going on here is I'm putting us all on a continuum. So the people who are caught in their perfectionism, well, heck, I know how to be caught in other stuff. It just may not impact the classroom as much, but it sure impacts my life. So, wee-haw. Do I want to bring that forward yet? Yes, now's the time. All right. So, I just want to say, thinking for human beings, powerful. And the role of thinking, as far as humans are concerned, is really to produce a human experience. The kind of experience where I like some things and I don't like others, where some things are important, where I have the freedom to put some things to the side and say, I want to pay attention to that. This is what I'm paying attention to. That is a very human experience. And that kind of analytical thinking produces that kind of reality. So that's its role. It produces our real sense of reality. By the way, reality, you may know this, but the re in reality basically stands for thing. So reality is thingality, and it has to do with the sense of separation and things that are worth getting and things that are worth rejecting. But our analytical thinking produces our reality. It turns everything that we could be paying attention to into reality, which is not the same thing as all of those things by themselves, or doing the dance that they all do together in a given ecosystem, as a for instance. Yeah. So that's all. Woohoo! Yay, good. I can put those pages down. So I promised, and I have actually 20 minutes to go. Yay! Thank God I'm getting to this now. A red line is required at this point. Let us say that state of mind has something to do with how humans are able to live their lives. So we could put multiple things in here. In the one sheet, I think I just gave you one sheet that had nothing on the back. That's probably got my best attempt to enumerate stages of state of mind. And I'm just going to do a super simplified version of this. And just to say, it is possible to have a state of mind where I am so caught up in stress, and I'm so caught up in disappointment and oughts and complaints. And by the way, if my happiness is so dependent on circumstances, it is incredibly easy for me to become an aggrieved victim. And just in parentheses, I don't mean to totally hang out here, but As I've reflected on this for about 13 years too, the most violent people on this planet are aggrieved victims. And when nations declare themselves to be aggrieved victims, and anybody who gets hurt by anybody else, it doesn't matter who started it, is an aggrieved victim. So if the real victim lashes out at the perpetrator gets to feel like an aggrieved victim. So this is not a limited membership club. Sorry to say. But this is state of mind, really hard to deal with this stuff. And so that's kind of the maximum, but just like, I don't have any space around my thinking, and it just it's pressured. There's so much anxiety. I have maybe, 5% of me is available, to study, to try to fulfill what most of us would say were normal human, tasks or obligations. But 95% of my attention is really already spoken for. And it's spoken for with things that are often kind of saturated with survival anxiety. Okay?
Clear the landscape, and then you can meet on neutral ground together.
Yeah.
And then co-create whatever it is that they need to do, which might not even be obvious to either of you until it's all way. So it's just a reminder to me that my job is not to solve the student's problem, and if I can't, it's not because I'm deficient and the student's deficient. Just maybe it's time.
Right.
I'm just working for it.
I would say we're aiming at an understanding here, not something else to do to get us the place we want to be. There may show up that there's some things to do that would be helpful and good. But the weird thing is that just having an understanding about how our analytical thinking, which is almost all that we do in this culture, and so much of school is hanging out in that territory, our analytical thinking tends to drive us into, I don't know, I want to do a fairy tale image of, when the older brothers try to go out and win the beautiful princess, the first one goes out and he rides away and finally he passes, he ignores the midget dwarf on the side of the road who was like saying, I have a piece of wisdom for you. It's like, you're just a midget. And he rides and eventually runs into a canyon, and it just gets narrower and narrower, and finally he's stuck. He on his horse is just stuck. That's it. I'm just saying, that's an image for saying our analytical thinking can go there unless it is also leavened by something else that can come through. You can draw another picture here that basically says, realm of thought, which is, most of what we pay attention to as human beings. Anything, any media, realm of thought, okay? And then the very potential for us to have that kind of thinking at all is something deeper underneath it. And then that's where we can pull in all these other words. Etc. So the point being, this could be called human being. They want to actually go together. Having all of this separation, all this kind of sometimes drama, all this wonderful proliferation of stories, when it's held lightly, when we're not trying to get all of our life from it, our identity and our sense of value, when we're not trying to make it come through, we get to hold it with some space. We get to treat it lightly. It still gets to be fascinating. And what so here's the real deal. I'm going to go on just a couple more minutes, but basically say, you might have guessed that I have more to share. And I would be very happy to. I'm very happy, should anybody wish to. I won't put you on the spot by asking right now, but should anybody want to meet after this, happy to do that. Otherwise, my new project for myself is I want to put a lot of this stuff on the web, make some really good videos available, and then make some ones that I produce available as well. But yeah, this is so crazy. It is so not in tune with what we think we know. It's so not in tune with almost all of my training. The only reason that I started to pay attention to it 13 years ago was that this very understanding, they started to take this into poor and violent neighborhoods 30 years ago. And they transformed them. So Homestead and Modelo, two projects outside of Miami in particular, were kind of the first ones that were utterly transformed. And they weren't transformed by somebody coming in and saying, I'm a psychologist. They couldn't do that. They came in and they hung out with people. They hung out with people who were in the most disastrous of circumstances. So mothers who were prostituting their daughters in order to get drugs. That kind of terrible, terrible stuff. And what the folks who came in said was, we're just going to hang out. We want to see what these people are experiencing, see what they think would be helpful. We're going to hang out. And as much as possible, we're going to be in a good mood while we do it. We're going to bring some food. We're going to treat them as if they were real people. And they already had value. And it just kind of, as you hang out with people, there become natural times when people start revealing that they've had some kind of experience like this. Or they're having a new thought now. It could be different. It was a very natural kind of organic conversation. So as instructors, what I can point to right now is any flavor of this possibility that we can bring into the classroom is what I would call part of universal design. Because it's going to help everybody. And it's going to help the people who are especially so over-identified with their, painful thinking. Like, there might be possibility of something new and really life-giving coming through for them. Making sense? A little bit? Other things I could say real quickly would be, when I deal with students as a counselor, if I find that they're in the middle of something really hard, I want to know what kinds of things they do that tend to help them, whether it's yoga or listening to certain kinds of music or doing free writing or journaling or whatever it might be, or walking the dog. I want to generate that kind of list, not because it causes this, but because it tends to open up some of the thinking that they're having, where we're open to this kind of thing coming forward. So, yeah, there are definitely some things to do, but just like pointing to, you can obviously use religious and spiritual terms for what we're talking about here. You can obviously do that. You can use meditation terms. You can obviously do that. But it is, if I'm saying nothing else, if we don't bring these things together and make this the human picture, then we're left with so much more struggle and so much more pain. And the assumption that to get out of it, there's so much work to do. And I want to say, finally, when we touch into this, it's just a lot easier. I already get to be alive. The guidance I experience when I open myself to guidance, I can say more about this, I need to end here, but the guidance that I experience can be exactly the projects that I gave myself over here. But there's a tone of voice when they come up freshly from here. The very projects like, Peter, pay attention to your breathing. And I feel, when that comes through, I feel like I'm already connected to life. It is not a project to get to life. I'm already connected. Does that make sense? A little bit? I'm just trying to say that. This is a huge resource, and I'm pointing to, oh my God, the possibility is not so much work. That's all.